Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whenever you happenstance into this incredible discussion with my mentors, and I'm glad to say, or honored to say, friends, but people that have been providing their incredible time and expertise into this deluge of anxiety and overwhelming everything that this Trump presidency is offering us. And we're soon going to be joined by Mark Dan here. To my immediate left is William K. Black. William K. Black is a criminologist, professor in criminology, economics, and law, probably best known for the savings and loan crisis. And someone who compositely understands the nature of fraud probably better than anyone that we can find and or interact with. But his wife, and right below him, is June Carbone. She is the Rabina Chair of Science and Technology and Law at the University of Minnesota. And underneath me is Mark Dan, former AG of Ohio and currently in independent practice, as you can see behind him, Dan Law. As always, I'll include links to their bios and their books in the description section below. But guys, it's Friday, April 11th, 2025, and boy, have we been hit with another week of unbelievable, endless shock and awe scenarios that obviously intersect in everything that we've been talking about for some time now. And I guess I'll start with, at the moment, the stock market appears to be rebounding from all of the previous week's losses because of the nature of the tariffs and all things international warfare, economic warfare by this incredibly incompetent president, but not to mention all of those that are in his cabinet that I saw signs during last week's 50-51 protests, which were quite amazing, by the way, and I was in the midst of, where the signs were reflecting pretty much everything that we're talking about, guys. I mean, everything that we're talking about is what people are holding up the signs, wanting answers to, but they seemingly can't quite get there because of all of the nature of the things that we're in the midst of. And I think that I'll just start with you, Bill. Off the top, how do you respond to what appears to be insider trading, or how would you define exactly what Trump did with this sort of buy the dip scenario?
Well, it's an interesting version of insider trading in which you break it first and then you say, by the way, I'm going to slightly fix it. And you know that the market is going to go up because you're stopped doing really stupid things. The fall will cease and there'll be a recovery. What you frequently get in stock market is extreme volatility and it overcorrects in other directions. The world economy is still screwed up mightily. We are still in the midst of a trade war with the largest exporting nation in the world. And China and a host of nations are now targeting the US dollar as well, which is this unique advantage that the US has had and carefully maintained for 70 plus years in my, more than my entire life. And Trump is threatening to toss that away as well. So consumer sentiment is way down. Prices are going to go up again because the nation we import so much from, we're putting tariffs that mean that we will not buy from China and vice versa. And the result, of course, is going to be a banzana um, for all kinds of other companies that are much higher cost companies. And that's, again, part of the reason the stock market, a U.S. stock market, will go up in those circumstances.
Well, Bill, on Thursday night, late Thursday night, or it might have been early Thursday morning, where it appeared that Trump's advisors, whether it was Scott Bennett or Ludnick or whomever's in the, probably Elon, by the way, who had called the gentleman in Trump's orbit who had been basically advising on tariffs as the dumbest man on earth. And obviously, we saw the quotes in the Wall Street Journal and so forth. But what you were just inferring was the bond market, right? And so the bond market started to pivot and started to, I believe, I don't know if it was going to be a collapse or a run or to what extent, but that seemed to be the red line that those billionaires within the orbit of the Trump universe started to, I guess, implore Trump in the early morning of, to pivot and obviously announce the 90-day sort of pause. Can you address, like you just said, the bond market? Because I did see a op-ed in the New York Times by a senior economist at Chase, and I found it incredible given everything that I've learned on our journey from the beginning, particularly as it relates to the 2000 great financial crisis and what came after. The title of the article was "Investors Who Prop Up the United States Economy Are Going to Think Twice and Not Forget This." And immediately what happened in my mind was, didn't the United States prop up investors? But that being aside, maybe if you could address, the idea of the bond market.
Yes. So first, these markets are related but quite different. The bond market is very different than the stock market, and the interests of bond holders are often antagonistic to stockholders and vice versa. So you don't necessarily expect them to track in the same way. The bond market acts far more quickly to produce potential disaster for the huge corporations, hence the huge CEOs, right? Because they're basically saying, no, we're not going to lend money to you. And what has changed over the last 70 years is that corporations, not just in America, but now worldwide, but particularly in America, are extraordinarily leveraged. That means they have a whole lot of debt compared to equity. So when I was young, a typical American corporation might have 65% equity. That same corporation today might have 20% equity. That means that they're frequently borrowing large amounts of money. And if the bond markets are saying, yeah, you know what, we're not going to necessarily do that, or only at really prohibitive interest rates, then every CEO starts freaking, right? And when that starts happening, corporations start pulling back on investments and such. And so you can trigger changes in what we call the real economy super quickly through the debt markets, the bond markets. The stock markets are important and we all lose money, but the shareholders, are overwhelmingly rich people. And yeah, okay, so they no longer have on market caps of what, $800 billion. They only have $600 billion. That's a serious effect, but it doesn't mean that you aren't going to be able to make a call for to develop, actually be able to present funds tomorrow. And again, if there's a bond call and you can't make the funding, then you're out of business, and all of that can happen within hours or minutes. This is again what the difference in the great financial crisis, right? The bond markets oh, yes, there was a huge stock market decline, but that isn't what caused the terrible problems. When the bond markets seize up, then nobody it will make a trade anymore. And if you can't sell something, how much is it worth?
Right.
Well, and I just to add,
Effectively, it's kind of worth zero during that period. And that over 1,000 markets closed down in the great financial crisis within hours. It petrified the folks. That's why radical changes in the bond or debt markets are far more, create vastly more anxiety in the CEO class and the prominent politicians. And so Trump backed off at that point. But that doesn't mean he's undone it. He's continued the a tariff levels with the People's Republic of China and with Canada and Mexico, our leading trade partners that are significantly higher, in the case of China, massively higher than Smoot-Hawley, the tariffs that helped trigger the United States to go not just into a Great Depression, but a really, really Great Depression, because again, they cause other countries to raise tariffs as well. And this war can go on and on. It's already reached the point where China has said, we're not going to bother to increase our tariffs anymore because there's going to be no trade at the existing level of the tariffs. So we're just going to ignore this and we're going to continue our war on the dollar through BRICS, which is this group that's trying to create a rival international currency to replace the dollar, which would be very bad for United States business as well. So don't be complacent because of any stock market recovery. The bond markets have demonstrated how fragile they are, and the trade war is continuing. Indeed, it's intensifying over the last week.
Mark, I think.
I just wanted to add a point. So I've been trying to reach my son, who's an investment banker who's securitized, does bond securities on Wall Street. And I literally, his mom and I can't reach him at all. And I imagine him in a room with Excel spreadsheets repricing his deals every 5 minutes as the week went on. I mean, he is. There's no way. And again, that's just one. That's just one example. Anybody that wants to start a new business or expand their business or add invest in capital equipment, everybody is literally at this moment paralyzed. And what's a bigger problem with what the administration did than whatever and Bill has made it clear, the substance of what they've done is horrifying and scary. But the fact is that they have paralyzed the economic activity of this country, because what we now know is that we can't believe what's coming out of the administration day to day, and no rational business person is going to make or seek an investment or take a loan in this environment, except those of us who have recession happy law practices like mine, where people will be flooding to us with their financial concerns and the collapse of their own and the loss of their jobs. That's going to trigger all kinds of issues. But there are very few businesses in this country that don't have to plan ahead, and certainly anybody who's going to create a job of the type that the administration, and I'm trying not to use the president's name anymore because he likes it too much, and I just think we all need to stop saying it. But this administration, because it's not just him, he has an army of collaborators working with him on this. Some very bright people, very capable people. There are members of Congress who are actually bright and capable, all of whom are complicit with him in this happening, in this administration. So it's the administration, it's the government's actions, it's not any one person's actions. But the idea that we've introduced this idea of complete uncertainty into our economy is left everybody just shaking their heads and having no idea what to do, and it's going to deter the kind of jobs that the administration is seeking, the blue collar jobs that my friends in Youngstown had before 2008 and before the steel mills were closed down in 1979. Those kind of investments aren't going to be made, even in the areas where the tariffs have been imposed, because there's no reason to believe that those tariffs are going to stick. And so who's going to go out and borrow millions and millions and billions to build a factory? And in fact, what we've seen is the opposite happen. Here in Ohio, Microsoft canceled $1 billion of data centers that they were going to build after, and they're going to pay for all the government improvements that were made to incentivize them to come here. And it's still a better deal for them not to build those data centers, at least in their view of the economy, than to build them. I think that's a strong message. And data centers aren't going to create those kind of jobs anyway, but at least except in the construction. And so that's the bigger problem. That frankly, we might be slightly better off had he just stuck with the ridiculous tariffs. They stuck with the ridiculous tariffs, um, uh, and not backpedaled, creating what is now an inability of anybody in the world to believe the U.S. government.
Wow, and to your point, it reminds me of the scene out of Harry Potter, right? It's Voldemort, he whose name we can't discuss. June, you've been predicting the calamity now for the past several weeks, and on top of that, we're in this incredible attack by the Trump administration, and of course, what you guys have been referring to as the tall building law firms, and we've seen further evidence from Paul Weiss and some of the others. And in fact, I was reminded that in the con we had interviewed Neil Barofsky in the offices of Jenner Block, which was in Midtown Manhattan, literally on the 75th floor. So we've been there in the midst of all of these powerhouses, and it's been this undercurrent of this dialogue, really to stress. We have a constitutional crisis on one hand, and we have a crisis within the legal profession on the other. Where do you dive in, Jen?
Well, I want to start with the issue you raised initially about insider trading. And, underlying all of this is the question, are they stupid? Or, is there, or are they simply malicious? And I think it's clear that Trump knows nothing about economics. He knows a lot about power. But on the issue of competence, these people are first, and I'm saying Trump and Musk and the people around them are people who believe the law doesn't apply to them. They believe their will is what should govern. That makes them careless about things like, including a reporter on a incredibly sensitive phone call, not to mention using a non-secure channel of communications. The rules don't apply to them. They're careless, and they're not professionals in the fields they've been charged with. So Trump gets ready to make a major economic announcement. Is he careful who he tells? The insider trading question is partly, did he deliberately tell somebody, like maybe Eric or Don Jr.? But fundamentally, even if he didn't deliberately do that, he's being careless. And that careless and pervasive lawlessness is a crisis on its own that deeply threatens the United States. Now, let's turn to the law firms. I think we're reaching a kind of Rubicon. And this is the Rubicon. So, what Trump's been doing, maybe from day one in his businesses, but certainly more recently, as he has returned to power, is asking for tribute. So, the various companies that have settled, I think of the 60 Minutes lawsuit, it's nonsense. There's no legal validity. Why did they settle? Because the people who own 60 Minutes, the big company in the background, not even the immediate company. This is a way of giving Trump a whole bunch of money. It's like a bribe. It is paying tribute. Now, what's happened with the law firms? And this is the thing that I think is switching. So I mentioned on earlier times in this podcast that, the people I talk to at big firms say, oh, we didn't agree to anything we weren't willing to do anyway. Paul Weiss, bring cases involving anti-Semitism. Hey, let us do it. We do that anyway. What we agreed to involves our pro bono committee deciding what cases we bring. We do this anyway. And the dollar amounts, when law firms talking about the dollar amount of pro bono, what they're really saying is, if we take what we charge for our lawyers, that probably started at $1,000 an hour in big law, and we say how many hours we spend on this at the highest rates we would ever charge a paying client, that adds up to a lot of money. But what it really is having our lawyers work for free on some issue we care about. Okay? The latest announcements are that the head of the pro bono at Paul Weiss has resigned. And the latest announcements coming out of Trump is he's having his captive law firms. He wants them to represent coal interests. This should terrify people on multiple levels. First of all, I pretty much guarantee you that's not what the law firms thought they had agreed to. Secondly, representing coal interests is not what they traditionally do on a pro bono basis. It's what they do on a paying basis. And some of these firms don't represent coal interests at all. Third, it seems to be that Donald Trump thinks what they agreed to is that they're his poodles. Russian TV after the election apparently had a picture of Putin with, Donald Trump on a leash. Well, that's how he thinks of these deals. I'll all of a sudden have the most powerful, experienced, and well-financed lawyers in the country at my beck and call. And what does Trump do with lawyers? He brings litigation that is vexatious, meaning it harasses people, that may be frivolous, in which his lawyers inevitably either have to lie or make arguments that they don't believe in, all of which are professional violations. And if he is either asking them to bring frivolous suits or vexatious suits or suits designed simply to gum up the works and delay things, that's all an abusive process. It's unethical. Lawyers can lose their license for doing this. So he's going to the major firms in the country and not just asking them to pay tribute. They were willing to do that. The point where he crosses this extraordinary line is where he's using a phalanx of private lawyers to weaponize the justice system at his beck and call. I can't see these firms have to say no to this, or they become like the Justice Department flunkies who are getting themselves into trouble, either by not lying in court and getting fired by Trump, or by lying in court and making frivolous arguments that violate professional standards. There is a crisis coming in this that goes beyond bending the knee.
Which will then, of course, trigger the economic crisis and the global crisis and every other crisis that's in the midst. And it just reminds me, as you were rolling through that, the notion that what I've seen Donald Trump do, especially after hearing the expertise of David K. Johnson over the course of decades, is to lie, deny, switch the blame, and implicate. And here comes this formula. And I want to turn this to you, Mark, because you had penned an op-ed for the New York Times that they had passed on. But this is center to everything. In fact, last night, we all saw Rachel Maddow platform Eric Holder to be the virtue, the paragon of justice, to draw the line in the sand of how the professionals have to, enamor courage, which is going to be based on integrity in the law and everything that promotes for the democracy. And I found myself going, you got to be kidding me. Mark, from where you're sitting, I mean, you've been in the middle of this thing for now decades.
And it's just a footnote on what June had to say. These poodles are also agreeing to change their hiring practices for the great for their great new master, and that is very serious and very significant. And in decades of battles that have taken and risks and career suicide that lawyers in these firms have engaged in order to get their firms to the place where they still don't reflect the makeup of the United States, but more reflect it. Do we really? And I think that's a huge compromise of principles that that also gets lost in this shuffle. And the optics matter here. The fact that they're acquiescing in a public way to this behavior is detrimental to the profession. It is shameful that the top 20 law firms in this country by revenue did not sign the brief in support of Perkins Coie. I mean, it is awful. It is one of the worst things the worst thing I can remember to happen to our profession in my 38-year career as a lawyer. So people, I don't know that you can overstate the importance of it. Um, so yeah, I mean, what's going to happen to the rest of us? There was a story this week about a lawyer who had represented an immigrant being he himself detained trying to travel in California. We bring cases against the government all the time in this firm. I mean, there's a very good chance that that's something that's, what am I going to include in my decision matrix, the consequences to my firm potentially by asserting somebody's constitutional rights in or right to better treatment by the government. Is this going to empower remember is this going to empower governors and mayors to begin to exercise the same kind of leverage in these situations in places where it becomes this at what point do lawyers no longer are in a position to render independent and unbiased advice to their clients and to present to the court reliable representation that judges can consistently rely on if folks are compromised. There's so much to think about here, and again, this matters more to lawyers than anybody else, but it matters to everybody because all the wheels turn, and all the potential protections of the separation of powers and the ability from this country to protect itself from becoming a dictatorship are in the hands of the lawyers. And just like in Germany in 1939, the lawyers are starting to get on board the good ship dictator because it's somehow believe it to be in their financial interest. Well, I mean, I think better of us than that, and I think there are a lot of lawyers that feel differently, and I'm hoping that those lawyers that don't, that aren't in that line of fire, will step up and fill some of the gaps. But it's all very, very troubling.
Bill, I know you'll want to pick up on that, but I want to just kind of insert this real quick because the nature of what we saw earlier in the week as well with Adam Schiff and Jamie Raskin were doing, investigations, obviously including whistleblowers from the Department of Justice, right? And when I saw what they were doing and what they were capable of, I'm sorry, I couldn't stop thinking about all of the things that you could have done over the course of a very long time, just for example set that aside. But then further, we have seen obviously the DOJ targeting specific people for investigations, right? So again, going back to that notion of lie, deny, switch the blame, and implicate, here is Donald Trump saying he was a victim of weaponization of the Justice Department, and he was going to have a whole campaign of retribution. And here we are, and this is what it looked like. I'm not sure if anybody is surprised, maybe the depth and the speed at which the complicity has taken shape. But can you marry those two things about A, what could happen with a government that does its job to do the investigations, and B, what we're looking at with this train wreck of, I'm sorry, it's corruption, right? So maybe you can pick up there, please.
Sure. So just as we're doing this today, the Justice Department went in front of a federal district judge after the Supreme Court had done this sort of 50-50-ish thing and refused to say what they had done to get this person back from El Salvador. And these they're not even really prisons. This is really a device of torture, right? In which there's a substantial danger that this person will end up being maimed or killed before it can be recovered. But they just absolutely stonewalled the judge and said, "We will not tell you what steps, if any, we have taken." And there was just a confirmation hearing in which the new NASA head, someone with immense conflicts of interest with Musk, where did admit Musk was there when Trump was interviewing him, refused to answer whether Musk took any role. And, you know, the senator asked it 12 different times in different variants. And he just kept the witness that's going to be running NASA just kept on refusing to answer, saying, "I was interviewed by the president. I was interviewed by the president," basically, refusing to answer the question as to what role, if any, Musk took, or whether they had any discussions, or whether he has reached any goals in his discussion with Musk and such. And again, the reason that Musk became wealthy is enormously government contracts and government tax subsidies and such. Back as far as the savings and loan debacle, Charlie Keating's key lobbyist strategist guru, a guy with the Strauss law firm. Strauss was the grand head of the Democratic Party and the grand partner of the biggest lobbying and most powerful lobbying firm in America, which is to say the world. He created a plan for Charles Keating to incapacitate the federal government's ability to respond to Keating's frauds. It's a detailed, in writing plan. Involves using Bivens actions, for example, which are actions in which they were deliberately going to seek to bankrupt any federal officials who stood in their way. You know, uh, full disclosure, I was one of those people, and they sued me for $400 million under the Bivens action and such. It was a very sophisticated plan. It involved actually putting moles on in positions running the federal agencies. Now, obviously, Trump doesn't have to go through those subterfuges. He just openly appoints moles controlled by the industry and refuses to answer. But my point is, this has been done for some very considerable time. And when we confronted that firm eventually, after we got discovery and found this memorandum, they said, so what? Until one thing we noted, oh, by the way, do you realize your partner was paid directly by Keating and the money didn't come to your firm? And of course, that partner was gone within 2 hours. So, self-interest that they've got figured out. So let's put this together. June, in particular, for many years, was a federal programs branch attorney in their honors program, and I was, relatively briefly. That entity specializes in defending governmental actions, their constitutionality, their statutory authority, and whether it's arbitrary and capricious. So we go, and you can sue typically anywhere in the United States. And of course, plaintiffs are smart, so they sue you wherever the program is most unpopular. So we get used to going in with very little notice for what are called temporary restraining orders, or TROs, where you literally are learning on the plane what the government program is that you're going to defend in 2 hours in, say, Montana, where it's a mining claim, and the federal judiciary is incredibly hostile to you. That office, I'm quite confident at least 85% of the attorneys would resign rather than uh, agree to do something unethical for Trump or anyone like him. So there's another reason they're going to these private lawyers. What I've noticed is I don't see anybody described as a federal programs branch attorney defending these cases, right? These are super higher ups in other particular units and such. The federal government right now doesn't have the capacity to defend competently large numbers of these kinds of suits. So we've discussed this in a prior taping. We need to be flooding the zone. And then Trump is going to roll out these private law firms eventually to try to take the load and defend his actions. Because the only reason you're going to have settled with Trump is you're willing to do sleazy things. And that's also going to produce, as June started introducing, a Gresham's dynamic at these law firms, in which the most ethical people will leave and these firms that become they're not even lapdogs, right? He doesn't want lapdogs. He wants them to be servile, but he wants them to have really sharp canines and be the kind that rip in and will just shake you after they bite into you until they take huge pounds of flesh. That's what Trump is going to want down the road. And he's either going to get it out of these firms or they're going to decide, no, there's some level at which I'm not willing to go, in which case Trump will come back at them for also for breach of these settlement agreements. And we haven't yet begun to discuss directly how are we going to get a campaign of having the bar associations, investigate and sanction the absolute epidemic of unethical legal conduct that this president is unleashing upon our nation. And just to go back to the economic type stuff, one of the absolute best things we had in the United States, if you were a business, was we had a relatively sounder rule of law and ethical level among our attorneys than any other nation that I was familiar with. And they are pissing that away, and that is taking two of the crown jewels of America and just trashing them. It's going to be so bad for American business and for the American people.
In knowing what I know, and I'll circle back to this later, I'm just going to mention as I kind of set up the question for June to respond to. But again, Eric Holder giving that delivery last night is drawing a line in the sand. Given what we know, is just audacious in its own right, Bill.
Yeah, we didn't explicitly answer your question as to why, to us, Eric Holder is, it's farcical to have him presented as the standard. Eric Holder was in charge of going after the elite criminals who perpetrated the great financial crisis. And he didn't simply fail, he didn't even try to hold them accountable. And that was a moral catastrophe, a legal catastrophe, but it's proven to be a political and an economic catastrophe for the nation as well.
Well, and Jude, coming out of the DOJ and your time there, obviously you're in an incredible position to address that. Plus the notion that I mean, look, they just gutted the crypto regulation, and then obviously the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act that you guys have endeavored in previous dialogues. But it raises the question, like Bill had just said, that you had proffered earlier: what can the private bars do?
Everything. I thought the most interesting part of Rachel Maddow's presentation last night was her noting that Judge Ludick on Blue Sky is talking about private attorneys going in on behalf of, the people being investigated by the Trump administration and filing claims for malicious prosecution, getting an investigation. These are private attorneys. I started off saying these folks are both careless and contemptuous of the law. Every member of Trump's cabinet, my guess, is guilty of something. And you can have private attorneys bring securities actions, bring a variety of private suits, insider trading, conflicts of interest. A variety of these things can be reached by the private bar, and they're legion. The opportunities for this are legion. I think there are a couple of things. When I get really depressed, I think, oh, but this is what we need. I've been saying for at least a decade, meaning before Trump won, the only hope for the country is putting a stake through the heart of the mega base. That is the cult-like mindset that has supported Trump and, supported the Tea Party beforehand. It is destructive. And what Trump said as an excuse for backing up a little bit on the tariffs, not taking them off, was, well, I'm willing to cause a recession. I'm just not willing to cause a depression. But I think the likelihood of a global depression is quite high, not maybe over 50%. A recession at this point is still probably over 50%. A depression could also happen depending on how the Chinese respond, how Europe responds, etc. And the question then becomes that sets the stage we missed in the great financial crisis. So when you look at Germany, the denazification that took place in West Germany, but not necessarily in East Germany, did discredit the people who were complicit in the regime. With the Trump regime, the name of the regime is corruption and incompetence that wreaks havoc on the United States. I think we have to think about what happens when the incompetence and the havoc take their toll. At that point, you want a counter movement. You want to hold the people who caused this. You want to hold them accountable. You need what Eric Swalwell is talking about, a presidential crimes commission that looks at all the crimes Trump committed. Um, this time, if Democrats got ever really swept, and I don't know, I think they will sweep the House. I don't know they will get that much control in the Senate. But impeaching and convicting him, having trials that make clear not the extent, just the extent of the corruption in some venal way of, oh, I accidentally told my butler the first thing in the morning about I'm going to relax tariffs today, and he went out and bought some stock. But rather the deliberate, systematic destruction. I mean, the amount of corruption that Elon Musk has done. David Kay had a piece on his website talking about how it's the Financial Times that reported he fired the people who are in charge of highway safety, who were investigating driverless cars at Tesla, which are notoriously unsafe and have killed people already. So what you've got is that level of conflict of interest and corruption. We need to go after it. Private attorneys can go after it in some cases. States can go after it in some cases with criminal prosecutions. But when Trump steps down, there needs to be a wholesale look at the criminality underlying this administration.
Well,
Well, one thing people who aren't lawyers can do is, and this is going to become an issue, it's already started to become an issue in some of the litigation about the administration's action is the issue of standing. I'm trying to remember. I think it was for certain actions on behalf of the CFPB employees were brought by organizations as opposed to the individuals who were directly affected. Where you don't need standing in any state in America, in the District of Columbia, is to bring a disciplinary complaint against a lawyer. Um, and I'm I'm reluctant to say this because when I was a public official, and many disciplinary complaints are brought and many of them are not valid, but at the end of the day, those can be brought by somebody who is aware of the mistake or aware of the violation without having to be the victim of the violation, which is a broad, much easier point of attack here. And I think that the disciplinary organizations and the Supreme Courts around the country, I think there's still enough of them that they will be willing to take action. You saw what happened to Rudy Giuliani. That needs to happen over and over and over again. Every Justice Department attorney that goes in and lies to a court a disciplinary complaint needs to be filed. And it will, first of all, slow the gears of all this. It's a tool to make these functionaries of the and these butt kissers that they're surrounding themselves with start to think twice about whether they're going to do everything Trump tells them to do. And so I think that's important. I think the other area is defamation law. I mean, there are lies need to be addressed in court. And these lies are such whoppers and so untrue that even under the high standards of the Times versus Sullivan, heightened scrutiny for public figures, or what you say about public figures or in the public debate, it exceeds that. They're saying things. Lawyers and non-lawyers are saying things that are blatantly untrue, that are having devastating consequences for businesses and individuals throughout this country. And though we need to start bringing those lawsuits as well. Whether the courts can handle this pressure, there's all kinds of questions about that. I mean, as I'm saying this out loud, but disciplinary complaints and defamation cases, the truth has to matter too, and legal ethics have to matter. And how do we make that happen? There are tools to do that.
right.
And
Well,
the
let
New
me
York,
mention on
yeah,
a just optimistic note, a court in Philadelphia has said that the Central Park Five, who have sued Trump for defamation based on comments he made in 2024, not at the time of the Central Park Five incident, they've survived initial motions and are able to proceed with a defamation case against him. He's proceeded to call them guilty long after they've been exonerated.
Well, and I don't think we should stop at Trump. I think we need to start to call these folks that have compromised their principles and their integrity to work for this guy. I think they need to be attacked. They're trying to make it as uncomfortable as possible for people to dissent. We need to make it as uncomfortable as possible for people to cooperate with the administration in their efforts to create this authoritarian state.
Guys, I was at the 5051 protest last week, and I had experienced, and I've done a little bit more investigation into who 5051 is, and Indivisible, and some of the groups that are involved. And I was on a conference call yesterday, and I got to tell you, these guys are smart. They're clever. They're inside the Beltway type people. They've had long-standing relationships across the board. A lot of these guys feel to me connected to the DNC. But meanwhile, a lot of the people that are showing up at these protests are the same people that showed up at Occupy Wall Street, for example. And they're the people looking for answers. And the signs were all over the place about fraud, all over the place about criminals, all over the place about, the obvious corruption, right? They're asking for someone, something to step into the void, which is what you guys are describing. But I want to turn this to you, Bill, because Bernie Sanders is a guy that seems to be, once again, at the age of 95, on this anti oligarchy tour, and he's joined by AOC. And they're, again, you know, proclaiming a lot of the stuff that I've heard throughout the last 14 years, right? And yet they do talk about corruption, but yet they don't talk about details about corruption. They don't talk about fraud. They don't talk about how to take it down. And I have to pose this question to you, Bill, because again, you've been in the midst of this for longer than anyone. I mean, everybody has on this call, but I am literally witnessing a sort of growth of a socialism slash communism slash, they call themselves anti-fascist, but all around their sensibilities are the system is so corrupt, the law has failed so completely that it's so obvious that the billionaires have absolute control and there is nothing that can stop them. And they're already moving into this revolutionary mindset, right? You have said to us forever that the greatest way that capitalism performs is when you have honesty in the markets. And so here we are, where there's this void, there's this disconnect, there's this bubble between the millions of people searching for answers and the answers that you guys have. And I know you've already demonstrated some of the other options, but can you maybe address, how you feel about the disconnect?
So first, at Bernie's invitation, personal invitation, I accompanied him just after the great financial crisis to one of America's great traditions, a Vermont town hall. 3.5 hours of any question the audience wanted to ask, and it was a good 50% of it was on fraud. So Bernie knows this stuff. He, I don't know tactically how he's choosing to play it now, but he's very good in those kinds of audiences because he doesn't sound like a politician anywhere near as much. There are many ways to do it, and the young people have to invent ways that work. But since we've got this former very senior official from Ohio, let me go back into history of, I don't know if I'm pronouncing this right, Mark may know, Coxey's Army
Yes.
set out from a little town 22 miles from Akron, Ohio, I think on Easter and marched to Washington, D.C. To take on this incredible war of the tariffs, in part, on the American people. And contrary to what Trump said, when we started, when the 1870s were not our golden era, it was the golden era of robber barons. Right?
The
So Coxey's Army comes.
golden era of people with the gold.
Yes.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Co
yes.
and Coxey, they march over 400 miles. Uh, and this is, many, many years ago. So they were out in the rain, marching and such. And as soon as he went forward to speak, he stepped on the grass and they arrested him for trespassing because he stepped on the Capitol grass to address the Americans' representatives. Anyway, out of that, one of the big things he was pushing for and succeeded, although years later, in getting Ohio to adopt was this direct I'll call it referendum. It probably
Hmm.
has a different formal name process
Right.
that Ohio still has.
Right.
And the reason Ohio still has protection for women's rights in the area of abortion is precisely that statute, which the legislature was going to, completely Republican dominated, eliminate all reproductive rights, essentially. Um, and then they uh, got the people made it clear they were going to go forward with this direct process. And so the legislature geared up one to make the requirement that you get a 60% vote instead of a majority vote. And the Ohio population by like 63% voted against that. And then they voted in down the restrictions on reproductive rights as well. So those very pro-democratic things, by the way, grew up in Michigan. That's why Michigan got saved from complete domination by MAGA type Republicans, this ability to have these direct propositions. There are things like that. Find really popular topics, get them on the ballot. You'll turnout goes up very considerably, and this is an excellent way to win. It's just an example. Young
Right.
people and old folks, as seasoned as Bernie, need to be using many different routes at this time.
But Bill, there's a second chapter that's not just about the MAGA folks and what they're doing and what the Republicans are doing. The Democrats in the state in 2023 uh, did everything they could to prevent us. Uh, I was working with a group of doctors that didn't want that wanted to. We wanted to bring that referendum in 2023, not in 2024. And the establishment Democrats nationally and in Ohio fought tooth and nail to prevent us from going forward with that referendum at that time. Because, and again, it's the cynical uh, corporatist Democrats that were more concerned with protecting the Democratic hedge fund executives and oligarchs than they were concerned with women dying. And I never forget a Zoom call with some of the leaders of the Democratic Party and these doctors who just looked the state party folks in the eye and said, because people will die this year if we don't get this amendment passed and people don't get the medical treatment that they're entitled to. And there is no other discussion about this. This has to happen as soon as possible. And it did, and it forced the legislature into a very quick campaign and kind of a badly run campaign to raise the threshold for constitutional amendments. Which frankly turned into a catalyst for the they were both issue one, which made it very complicated. So in August we were against issue one, and in November we were for issue one. So that was a bit of a challenge from a political standpoint, but it was not just this is not about electing our friends back to office. This has got to be about more than that, and those kind of organic uprisings need to be nurtured because Patrick, the organizations that you talked about, I'm sure I'm sure they're fine people on both sides. No, I'm sure there are fine people, but that Democratic establishment is not. They're interested in fundraising with and skimming 50% of the dollars off the top into their chosen fundraising firms. There's conflicts of interest that abound among those DC-based organizations. And in the spirit of Mr. Coxey, Jacob Coxey, I think what we need to do is think about and encourage people to build their own uprisings, build their own campaigns, and that was the magic of the Tea Party, is that actually, well, we found out later it wasn't, but it appeared certainly at the time to be more organic than it was. It was actually funded by the Koch brothers, of course. But I think that this is so bad, and people are. I can't tell you. From 5 a.m. in the gym until 11 p.m. in the bar. People are asking me, "What can we do?" I've never had that happen to me in my life. I've never had that conversation more than once a day, and sometimes more than once a year. So the answer is figure out what you care about and organize. And don't wait for the professional organizers to organize. Don't wait for Bernie Sanders and AOC to come to town. Don't wait for Tim Walz to come and hold. He was here in Ohio holding town halls this week. Fine guy, and it was an effective. It was an effective bunch, but it was not. Those people that went to those town halls needed to leave with a message, with a mission to start to organize those kind of rebellions, whether they're small or big. And we're starting to see that. Coming out of the federal courthouse every Wednesday. They're in front of the federal courthouse, which is where Senator Marino and Senator Husted's offices are in Cleveland, to ask them to have a town hall and listen to the concerns that they have, and to demand. And that crowd's been growing. Those should be on every street corner. And so it can't just be Occupy Wall Street. It's got to be Occupy every street.
Yep, Mark knows this, but we are brothers in arms on this one. Six prominent elected officials went after me big time. Five of the six were Democrats.
Mm-hmm.
And I ultimately left the government because of reinventing government, which was, just handing over government to big business under the Clinton administration. And then all of our frustrations, I spent many months trying to get the Obama administration, which again filmed one of its campaign ads in our living room in Kansas
Mm-hmm.
City, Missouri. With an interview based on me, but they would not ever even meet with me to discuss actually prosecuting the elite felons that drove the crisis. So, amen, brother.
Yeah.
Well, the next time will be different, and let me note what's on the horizon. Trump doesn't really want to go near abortion, but the most recent rounds of confirmations, just under the radar, are crazies on the abortion issue. So the FDA is likely to rescind the approval of the abortion pills, and that will affect everyone. And if you look at the Civil War, Dred Scott and the fact that you couldn't keep enslavement out of the North helped touch off the conflagration. I think Trump will overextend at every step.
Mark, I know that you need to drop off. June and Bill, if you want to stay on for a couple more minutes, I'm going to maybe just tee up one question to June, Mark, if that's okay with
Yeah.
you.
No, it was great to catch up again, and hopefully next week. Thanks.
Good
Okay.
to see you.
Thank you, Mark. And June, look, you've been such an inspiration. I mean, your husband has been forever for me, but it's just so incredible to be able to interact with you. You've hit the point over and over that, again, to remind the audiences that need to understand where you guys are coming from. You've been in the battle, in the trenches of all of the elements that have constituted what we're now in the midst of, and it's so crystal clear. Again, like what we said in the kind, when you take the cops off the beat, or if the cops get corrupt, then obviously the criminals take over. Okay, here we are. Everybody knows it, and yet, just to Mark's point, and what Bill had said before, there's still this sort of comfort zone, I hate to call it, in light of just these abominations, that the law is actually being run over like a steamroller that, nothing can seem to stop even court orders, given, the mistakes with the deportations and what we just saw today. And, I could go down this litany, which we just touched on upon, but you've talked about honor and integrity throughout as being the mission critical component here. And what I it's one thing for people to go out on their corner to organize about something that's important, but what we have collectively put together is a decades long march that cost this country trillions of dollars in both GDP and also in all of the machinations of bailouts to a system that didn't have any accountability, that's led to this massive criminal engine that obviously high. In fact, I'm going to dovetail this into the final question here. That Bill had taught me years ago that there was an agreement, something that happened in the 90s where these large white shoe, tall building law firms could become both the shield and the sword. And that's what led to these deferred prosecutions and these statements of facts without all of the evidence and all of these details that envelop the racketeering. And so when you're talking about your profession and the disconnect from the American people who don't know how our system works, what these are intended to do is to get the message to also all of the different vectors who have larger voices than I do, as also people who could potentially take this information and make it something that could go more mainstream. For example, if we could compositely bring all of this information to the fore to give people hope that you guys know how to defeat this, what do you want to address such that Bernie's not doing it? I guess is the easiest way to ask that question.
Well, I'm going to give you what I want to write my next book about, and it goes far beyond this discussion. But um, the core of it, I mean, I wanted to call it "There's no there there." People tell me nobody will get it. So the whole in the middle of the economy, how Donald Trump moved into it, and what the rest of us can do about it. If you think about what this tariff idea, to the extent it has any rational supporters, and we can leave aside whether they're rational, is about. It's this harkening back to the age of manufacturing, the great union jobs in the middle of the 50s, bring back this old era. And I say, what's the core of that era? The grand concordat of labor peace in 1948, the foundation of the 50s as a time of relative solidarity in the US, um, is built on the idea the capitalists, the Henry Fords, needed large, stable, and skilled labor forces. The workers wanted stable and secure jobs. The Democratic Party, which is the governing coalition of that era, had the union halls as the mainstream, the foundation of the Democratic Party. And the companies supplied identity, commanded loyalty. Bill's stepdad was a Ford guy. He never in his entire life bought a car that wasn't made by Fords. When they retired and moved to Florida, they went to a church with UAW supporters, as opposed to the denomination they had of the church they had attended in Michigan. The identity, the belonging, the sense that the society is taking care of you came from the grand agreement between the capitalists and the workers facilitated by government. I listen to all these people talk about bringing back manufacturing. It is complete and utter BS. Even if you bring back manufacturing, the key jobs will be the tech jobs, and they will turn over quickly. You've automated. I mean, what Walmart wants to do is to automate its warehouses. Amazon would do so in an instant. We've gotten rid of those jobs. We need to ask what replaces the jobs. Ezra Klein has his new book on abundance. I also think it is either trivial or pernicious. I'm inclined to think it's trivial. How do we build more and more efficiently? How do we have government be efficient? But what he's not talking about are jobs that confer identity and meaning. And so my pitch for those who want to form the resistance, but more critically, those who want to rebuild afterwards, is we need a vision. And the vision is we are a community. We're going to need a phalanx, not of lawyers to harass opponents. We need to bring the crooks in this administration to account, but we need to rebuild our communities. We need more daycare centers. We need custom-made furniture rather than thinking about hiring people in, um, you know, uh, Donald Trump was waxing eloquent about bringing back jobs from China so people could make pencils and erasers. Those are going to be automated. We need the jobs that confer meaning, the custom craftsmen, the community service folks who help with, substance abuse rehabilitation, the community centers that assist families. We need to tackle bird flu. We need to tackle safety. And if you think about that, that the mission after Trump wrecks it is the mission to rebuild a just society. So locking up the crooks is needs to go hand in glove with rural broadband, with an expansion in housing, with new construction, with a distribution of the benefits from a great society to the entire population, instead of the manufacturing Trump has in mind, if it were to exist, and I don't think it will, is how to allow Elon Musk to steal more of the benefits of his employees' labor. It's not how to bring the benefits of the system to everyone. The great manufacturing jobs were great manufacturing jobs because of unionization and government regulation that curtailed the power of the plutocrats.
Bill, will you pick up on that and just I've heard you mention echoes of that throughout the years. I'll be really interested to see how you close out here based on what June just gave us.
Well, what Trump has done is to make everything that made America great sound stupid, right? Honor, treating people well, being respected for your role in the community. All of those things the tech bros think are stupid. I think they're the keys to making a civilized world in which you don't have to have $1 billion to be respected or listened to.
It's not necessary to hope to persevere. We keep on the righteous grind. And I will thank you as always. And until next time, you guys have a wonderful weekend. All the best to you and your family. And yeah, just another week in chaos. But thank you very much for your insight and everything else. We'll be in touch.
Take care.
Thank you.
Be well.